Welcome back to Kapowich on Real Estate. This is a program dedicated to consumer protection within the residential real estate arena. We are pleased to have back in the studio Larry Stone, County Assessor. Larry, welcome.
Thank you.
It's been a few years since you've been here.
It has.
We are.
I thought I wasn't doing a good job the last time, but thank you.
We should have you every year. We should have you here. So, by the way, I go to a lot of seminars. I'm well over 100 seminars in terms of real estate, and you're one of my favorite speakers.
Thank you.
If not my favorite speaker. So I would like to get into some of this. For instance, you have different speeches depending on the audience, right?
Correct.
Okay, and so I borrowed one of your talking points here, and I'd like to hit this with you here. So we're talking about the recovery of the greatest economic meltdown of my lifetime.
And mine too.
And yours too. Okay, let's talk about that for a bit. And how you had mentioned before about in Silicon Valley things happen fast and happen first.
Yes, we have to be mindful of the fact in Silicon Valley that there's cycles everywhere, but our cycles tend to be steeper and faster, going up and going down. So we tend to lead things nationally, in the state, and of course locally, up and down.
Yes, I know when you go to the convention with the other 47 assessors, they want to know what's happening in Silicon Valley.
Absolutely.
Right. Okay, let's get into the renting. Renting's been a problem. I tried to help a family member when it was real hot, and they did not return your phone calls or emails to property managers. What's happening with the apartments?
Well, the apartments have enjoyed about 6 straight years of up and to the right. Rents are up, vacancies are down. In fact, for the last 4 years, vacancy of apartments in Silicon Valley have hovered around 96%.
Wow.
4% vacancies, 96% occupancy.
Sure.
Rents now on an average 2-bedroom apartment in Santa Clara County is over $2,400 a month.
Unbelievable.
And there's been thousands and thousands of apartments built, new construction of units.
Right.
So things are beginning to stabilize. I call it stabilize. Some people say softness.
Yeah.
But we're beginning to see for the first time 4 rent signs outside of apartment complexes. I understand that there's some small rent concessions now given on some geographic areas of the county. So I think we're running into stabilization with respect to apartments, and that's good. It's not bad.
And I saw that because I do a lot of driving as a realtor, and I saw these buildings going up, and I said, oh, okay, now the landlords are going to have their comeuppance, right?
Yeah, well, real estate developers will overdevelop everything if you give them the time and the money.
Yeah. You often speak about the median household income.
Yes.
Santa Clara County, we have the highest?
The highest household income in the nation right now at over $102,000.
Unbelievable. And in terms of the job gains?
Well, we've had just enormous job gains here. Unemployment right now is like 8 straight months of below 4% in Silicon Valley. That's better than the nation and the state as a whole.
Consumer confidence rose in 2016 to a 13-year high.
13-year high for consumer confidence in 2016. That's something that is very good for the Valley because what we do, consumers, a lot of what people buy from products from companies in Silicon Valley are not necessary to living. And consumer confidence is good. That means tech sales will be even better.
Now, I've seen you speak many times. You often talk about how Silicon Valley is an island.
Right. We have to understand that what we're experiencing here in the boom times is not experienced in other parts of the country. And so we have to understand that we're on an island, but the water around that island is pretty choppy sometimes, and right now I think we're going through that.
Right, and I've often gotten that question as a real estate agent because when's a good time to sell, when's a good time to buy, and it's a little different here in Silicon Valley with all the people coming and going.
Absolutely, and everybody tries to, like they do the stock market, they try to pick the top of the stock market, they're trying to pick the top of the real estate markets, and that's never a good system, I don't think.
Okay, you mentioned, I get the question, but they're of course asking you, what's the difference between the current boom and the dot-com boom?
A lot difference. During the dot-com boom 17 years ago, most of the tenants were startups who had no earnings, and they were leasing space for growth that never occurred. Today, Apple, Google, LinkedIn are buying land and building buildings. They have earnings. They have real earnings.
So they have cash in a bank.
Absolutely. So we're seeing these high-tech companies that are very successful actually getting involved in the real estate market, shunning long-term leases in favor of ownership.
Now, you talk about the baby boomers being the long-term future of the job market.
The baby boomers are millennials. We call them Gen X and Gen Y are millennials. Are the most fascinating part of what's going on economically throughout the country. They look at things completely different than people our age.
I agree.
One of the problems is that more baby boomers are leaving the job market than millennials are entering the job market, and that can have long-term consequences overall in the future.
You were speaking about the home ownership. Oftentimes they watch their parents get hammered in the Great Recession, or everyone knew someone that lost their home or a short sale, so that didn't feel right.
The millennials look at things completely different. They have seen, number one, trillions of homeowner equity evaporate during the Great Recession. Number two, college graduation often comes with as much as six-figure student debt, which makes buying a home more difficult for people who have that debt and can't qualify for the loans.
So it's very, very similar. I thought that how our parents talked about, they watched the Great Recession, their parents in the Great Recession, grown-ups in the Great Recession, and then this crowd, the millennials, watched the baby boomers in the Great Recession, rather, depression our parents had,
Well, the millennials are much more mobile. They can do the same work in London, San Francisco, Singapore, or New York. And they get married later. So they don't look at home ownership as something that, they don't look at home ownership as something that automatically increases in value. They're much more tied to an urban environment, close proximity to what everything happens. One of the fascinating statistics is only 44% of millennials got a driver's license by the minimum age, and 20% hadn't got a driver's license by the age of 18. Now, when I was 16 years old, I was in line down at the DMV on my birthday.
Too, the same
but
day.
That was a rite of passage then. It's not for millennials.
Right. I was amazed that millennials make up almost a third of the population in Silicon Valley.
29% of all people that live in Silicon Valley are millennials.
Now you were speaking about how they choose a place over a job, which is one of the reasons San Francisco and downtown Oakland and downtown San Jose.
Absolutely, they want the urban environment. So when you see those buses drive down all over that's these young people that want to live in an urban environment, and they want to get to work. The real estate director of Facebook told me that 49% of the employees at Facebook headquarters arrive by bus.
Wow.
Google has over 52 buses that come in every morning, park at Moffett Field during the day, and then take these folks home. 52 buses for one company, and then you've got Apple and LinkedIn and all the rest of them.
That's what you were speaking about, that work-walk environment. Preferably they'd be in San Francisco and not take a bus.
Yes, they want to live in an urban environment. There's close proximity to things that they do, where they work, where they entertain, where they live. The sharing environment is very important to millennials and Gen Xers. Ride sharing, Uber and Lyft, bike sharing is exploding for young people. These racks of bikes that you see all over. They look at things completely different. Unlike, I grew up as a teenager in the 50s and college in the 60s, and we were different than our parents, but there's nothing like the divide that exists between our generation and the millennials today.
Now you were speaking about the difference between a mortgage. Why be tied down to a mortgage? I've seen you speak about, they would rather have freedom than home ownership.
Older people believe that renting is throwing your money away. An increasing number of young people today believe that owning is throwing your freedom away. And a lot of that has to do with mobility.
Yes. Now you see them, the young people, they're always traveling, they're always leaving the country because they're renting a room and
That's
they
right.
don't have a big
It's much more flexibility. So their mindset is, why get tied down to a mortgage when I want to be able to be free enough to move both job
Right.
or for a lifestyle.
Right. Speaking of houses, we do the stats on my website. We've been watching the numbers as well, and of course, last year it went over $1 million for the medium home.
Mm-hmm. Highest in the nation right now.
And that's twice the rest of the California.
Home for sale inventory has been down for months and months,
Sure.
which is causing too much money to chase too few homes, which causes home prices to skyrocket. And that is a problem. It's a serious problem in the Bay Area because home prices are so high that very few people, most of the people that work and rent in Silicon Valley have no way of ever owning a home given the current environment.
Right. What about that all cash transactions?
Well, more and more in Silicon Valley, transactions are all cash. Over 20%, I believe, of home transactions are all cash. A lot of this is also foreign money. The Chinese continue to invest heavily in Silicon Valley real estate, and most of those transactions are all cash.
You had mentioned some of that slowed down because the Chinese want to.
Just recently, the Chinese have limited the amount of Chinese capital that can come into the United States, down by about 29% over the last half of last year. So that will have an impact. And of course, they don't occupy the homes, and it's kind of dangerous. If investors buy single-family homes and they don't live in them, investors tend to move out of an investment about the same time. And that could have serious impacts upon the residential markets if all of these all-cash buyers from foreign investors decide that they want to divest themselves of their investment.
Right.
If they do it at the same time, it could have an impact upon housing prices in this area.
Yeah, that's a good point because if we've been watching the market for decades and you see people move en masse, and if all those Chinese landlords sell at the same time, that could have a.
And some foreign investments are just flight capital, people from foreign countries looking for a safer place for their money, and there's no more safe place in the world than the United States.
Now, you made a good point about, and I was in the audience as you spoke before, during, and after the Great Recession, how if there's a neighborhood with good schools.
Yeah, the one thing you can count on with residential real estate in California is schools. Those neighborhoods with excellent schools saw far fewer declines during the Great Recession, and they've seen more rapid increases in value in the recovery.
Now, in terms of condos and townhouses, we see a lot of those being built as well.
The condo and townhouses market has been on fire, and that's because of the requirement by lenders that a certain amount of the units be pre-sold, a higher amount than we've ever seen, before the construction loan funds. So there's not a lot of condo and townhouses being built. Most of the multifamily stuff you see are rental apartments, not condos and townhomes.
Sure. You had mentioned before, though, that the townhouses were selling well.
Yes.
In terms of the sales volume, well, let's get into office space. Office sales declined. Office sales volume in 2016 declined 44%.
Yeah, I think the office market it's hit its peak. In the last 4 years, about 70% of all new office construction was pre-leased before the project was completed. That's way down now. So it's an indication that the office developers are beginning to overbuild the office market here. We're seeing increased vacancies, we're seeing less, and of course Apple and Google, particularly Apple, has cut down on the amount of real estate land and buildings that they're building, and just one company can have a major impact upon the entire market.
Sure. This was an amazing stat. At the end of 2016, 12 million square feet of office space was under construction in Silicon Valley.
That's correct. And that's one of the reasons why we developed more office space in the last 2 years than the previous decade combined. And you see that all over the valley. Mm-hmm. I go to Sacramento a lot, and I used to drive by 6 totally vacant brand new office buildings like 5 years ago. Now all those office buildings are leased mostly to major credit tenants. And the other day I counted 14 additional office buildings on that same 5-mile drive between my home in Sunnyvale and Milpitas on my way to Sacramento.
Yeah, and that 230, I've watched that too. What about in terms of their need? You had mentioned about the need for space for each employee. That changed.
Companies, tech companies primarily, are downsizing their office space and increasing their employee headcount. They believe that collaboration is important. It's called the collision environment, where they want fewer offices and cubicles, more open space. The whole thing is 50% office space, which is me space, and 50% collaboration space, which is we space. Tech people believe that collaboration, the more often that employees can collaborate with each other, the higher the productivity and the more innovation capability that they have. There's a 95% chance of employees coming in contact with each other when they work on the same floor. That drops to 5% when they work on different floors, even with the same company. They're eliminating, I just heard this morning that IBM is eliminating all of its telecommuting. Marissa Mayer, the former CEO of Yahoo, eliminated all telecommuting when she became the CEO to encourage more collaboration among employees.
Which was genius. She was ahead of the curve on that.
That's right. And I just heard today on the news that IBM is doing the same thing.
Yeah. That's too bad for a lot of home buyers, because they say, oh, I can have an office here and I can work from home 2 days a week. Maybe that's going to be changing. By the way, I think they got that idea from marketing, because for years in marketing and advertising, the person that did the drawings was on one floor, and the person that had the ideas was on the other floor, and the person that had the concepts, and they all put them on the same floor, and boom.
And that's why more companies are moving back to the U.S. from foreign locations, because they believe that separating the design function from the manufacturing function can be problematic. Also, the threat as the world becomes more disorderly and the U.S. kind of retreats from being the world's policeman, there's a greater threat on the supply chain across the ocean. So companies are recognizing that, and more are combining their design function with the manufacturing function, which used to be mostly in Asia. I heard you speak about that a while ago. And you've been speaking about that for a few years now. Yes.
Okay. In terms of the warehouses, can you speak about the warehouses?
I'm very bullish on the warehouse and industrial market. The warehouse market locally has less than 1% vacancy right now, and the industrial market has less than 3% vacancy. So it's a major thing, and as manufacturers and companies want to deliver the product, sometimes same day or next day delivery, they need warehouse space closer to where consumers live. So large warehouses to store product cheaply are going down, as smaller warehouses closer to consumers for that fast and cheaper delivery.
I had a friend in the hotel industry during the Great Recession. She was flat out of work. She did 30 years and then boom, nothing. Can you speak about the hotel?
The hotel industry got hit the most. It's the most sensitive to economic fluctuations, and of course that really occurred big time with the hotel industry. They now are enjoying a real surge over the last 3 or 4 years, as coming back. But there's a real risk here, because telecommuting and teleconferencing and video conferencing is filling a void for often what is unproductive travel. So you can spend less, and so much more business is being done through e-commerce and also through telecommuting, teleconferencing and video conferencing that now will probably have an impact upon hotel occupancy.
Sure. Now, I spent a lot of time in retail, and the fellows that own those buildings, they always tried to get everything right. Didn't always happen.
Right.
Right. You mentioned that that was a slow start to get that back rolling.
Well, retail was one of the slowest to come out of the Great Recession, but it's really caught fire. But the retail is one of the most fascinating industries we have, because the shopping center market was terribly overbuilt during the dot-com boom.
Right.
People were, and it was based upon an old concept that people would walk in the front door of a storefront and shop. With e-commerce, online purchases, that's impacted the brick and mortar stores greatly. But even that, only 14% of all retail sales last year were online. Now, I'm sure it's much higher in Silicon Valley because we're a lot more tech savvy.
Sure.
But still, there's such a huge potential for online sales. And people use showrooming, where they go to the store and look, feel, and see the product, and then go home and buy it online, often at a discount, often without paying sales tax.
Yes, I've been in the stores, and we're at the same shelf, and the fellow next to me has a smartphone out, looking at a better price.
Yeah, right.
So, and that you had spoken that before, that the millennials are really driving the e-commerce.
Right. I mean, they grew up in a one-click society, and they really believe that everything should be done online, and I'm sure they're driving the e-commerce, the increase in e-commerce nationwide.
So in terms of the retail, you mentioned it was a survival of the fittest, I think the term is you used.
There's dozens of stores going out of business. And you can name them, Mervyn's and Blockbuster, and the list is endless. And major retailers are closing stores. Walmart is closing many stores, including one right here in San Jose on Monterey Road.
150. Huh?
Yeah, 150 stores, and they're downsizing their space, so they're increasing their warehouse space in order to deliver things close to consumers, while at the same time they're decreasing their store space and their storefront space. It's having a major impact on the entire retail industry.
And the wild cards here, we have the dysfunction in Washington.
Yeah, things are looking good. I think most economists that I follow believe that there'll be a recession, hopefully a soft landing recession, no later than mid-2018. But continued dysfunction in Washington, D.C. is having a major impact upon real estate business. We're seeing cyber crimes, economic espionage having a big impact. Hackers are threatening our very basis, both politically and business-wise.
Sure.
There's a lot of wild cards out there that are concerning. Immigration reform is a major problem, particularly for the Valley in California. Our infrastructure, bridges, dams, as we know locally, schools, things like that, roads, are seriously in decay, and the cost of fixing that is going to have a major impact upon the economy.
In terms of the stock market,
well, we've enjoyed, the stock market has gone from 6,500 in 2009 at the height of the Great Recession to over 20,000 recently. It's dropped in the last few days, but recently over 20,000. And Silicon Valley has led that. The NASDAQ outperformed both the Dow Jones and the S&P 500 by a significant amount, both in 2015 and 2016.
What about travel? You had mentioned about people coming and going as a low cost of fuel. Is that going to help?
Well, what really happened there, what I was talking about there, is that Americans are saving at a much greater rate than they have over the last 25 years. Why is that? So the fuel, what they call the fuel dividend, with the reduction in oil prices, is going to savings, not necessarily to consumer spending. And I believe it's because the Great Recession is having an impact upon the thought processes of Americans, the same way that the Great Depression had on my grandparents.
Exactly.
My grandmother was very frugal, and I think it was the experience that she went through with the Great Recession, and we're seeing some of that, or the Great Depression, we're seeing some of that here as a result of the Great Recession.
You're seeing it with me.
Yeah.
Because I just went through it, right?
Right.
Yeah. So
absolutely.
Now I know why our grandparents were frugal. And you talked about the immigration, because a third of our patents here in Silicon Valley were from
Absolutely.
foreign-born.
Silicon Valley depends upon immigration. And most economists will tell you that GDP growth depends upon immigration. Particularly, 62% of high-tech workers in Silicon Valley are foreign-born. 62%.
Right.
Many of these companies were founded by foreign-born individuals. 200,000 Chinese educated in the United States 3 years ago went back to their home country, China or Taiwan. Now those people, they're educated here and they went back to their home countries. Those people will compete with American businesses, and we have to understand that.
Larry Stone, thanks for coming out today.
Thank you for the invitation. It's always great to be with you, Pat.
Great. Thanks again for watching Kapowich on Real Estate. This is a program dedicated to consumer protection within the residential real estate arena. We will see you next week. Thanks for watching.